Welcome to this explainer. If you're a parent trying to figure out your child's unique development, you are in the exact right place. We're going to dig into some medical guidelines, recent research, and expert resources to build a real step-by-step educational roadmap together. We'll break down the whole shebang, from early signs to how the diagnostic criteria actually works and what therapies are out there. So let's just dive right in. You know, it usually starts with just a quiet little question in the back of your mind, right? Maybe you've noticed your child isn't responding to their name the way other kids do, or they just seem kind of uninterested in playing with the kids next door. Look, I want to validate exactly what you are experiencing right now. Noticing these differences, it can feel incredibly overwhelming, but let me reassure you, seeking answers is literally the most empowering first step you can take. You are already doing an amazing job just by being here. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start by recognizing those early signs, then look at the nuances and variations. After that, we'll tackle masking and overlapping conditions, navigate the actual diagnostic process, and finally, explore therapies and support. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, recognizing the early signs. What's actually really fascinating here is just how practical these early signs are. Looking at the widely used MCHAT-R screening tool and NHS guidelines, autism often shows up in the tiny details of everyday play. Like, does your little one lack pretend play? Pretending to feed a doll or drink from an empty cup? Do they avoid looking you in the eye when you're talking to them? Or maybe they don't point with one finger to show you something cool, like, hey, look, an airplane, just to share that moment with you. And if a kid consistently doesn't respond to their name by 9 months old, well, that's often a key sign for pediatricians to take a closer look.
Now, there's also a specific pathway that really stood out in the research: regressive autism. Sometimes you'll see a child hitting all their milestones. They're talkative, engaged, super energetic, and then suddenly, they just go quiet or lose those skills. According to Autism Parenting magazine, this usually happens between 15 and 30 months of age. If your chatty toddler suddenly stops using words or stops waving and making eye contact, please hear me when I say this is a recognized phenomenon. It is absolutely not your fault, and spotting it is just the very first step toward getting the right help.
Moving right along to Section 2, understanding nuances and variations, because autism is definitely not a straight line. When we look at the data from Medical News Today, we see that an estimated 25 to 30% of autistic individuals are non-speaking or minimally speaking. The absolute most crucial takeaway here? We really need to shift our language away from that deficit-focused word nonverbal and use non-speaking instead. See, the term nonverbal kind of incorrectly implies that a person has no words or language understanding at all, which is just a huge misconception. To really hammer that point home, our source material says having non-speaking autism does not mean a person cannot communicate or understand language. I want to emphasize this because it is such a massive light bulb moment for parents. A lack of speech absolutely does not mean a lack of understanding or intelligence. Many non-speaking autistic people write, type, and communicate beautifully. Your child is taking everything in. They just need the right tools to express it back to you. Okay, Section 3, masking and overlapping conditions. This is where things can sometimes hide in plain sight. Historically, there's a really fascinating difference in how boys and girls get diagnosed. For a long time, autism was identified way more in boys, mostly because the diagnostic tools were built around male-based stereotypes. Boys might externalize their distress, acting out physically, and show intense focus on specific objects. Girls, on the other hand, they often internalize that distress, which can look like anxiety or depression. Plus, they tend to be more motivated by relationships, like forming an incredibly intense bond with a pet or one single best friend. Because of this difference, girls are frequently overlooked or misdiagnosed altogether. A huge reason girls and older kids in general slip under the radar is this concept of masking. Masking is essentially social camouflaging. It means copying peers, literally rehearsing scripts for conversations, and suppressing natural self-soothing behaviors just to fit in. If your child is holding it together perfectly at school, but the absolute second they walk through the front door they have a massive meltdown, that is a classic sign of the extreme exhaustion and anxiety that masking causes. It takes a massive toll on a child's mental health. Now, you might be wondering, what if your child struggles socially, but it doesn't quite feel like autism? Our sources from Avery's House outline a really key differentiator between social communication disorder, or SCD, and autism. Both share social communication challenges, like struggling to take turns talking or totally missing sarcasm. But to actually be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, a child absolutely must also exhibit restricted interests or repetitive behaviors.
We're talking about things like stimming, hand flapping, or having a really rigid insistence on daily routines. If those repetitive behaviors are completely missing, the diagnosis points to SCD, not autism. They literally cannot be diagnosed with both.
All right, let's move into the action phase. Section 4, navigating the diagnostic process. So, how does this actually work? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends some chronological milestones to check on developmental progress. During your routine doctor visits, you'll generally see these short developmental screenings at 9 months, 18 months, and then between 24 to 30 months. These are just quick tests to see if a kid is picking up basic skills. If your pediatrician notices any delays during these specific windows, that's usually the trigger for a more detailed autism assessment. If you do get referred for a full assessment, it generally follows 3 pretty manageable steps, usually done by a multidisciplinary team. Think a pediatrician, a psychologist, maybe a speech pathologist. Step 1 is the assessment of function, where they look at your child's daily living skills and pinpoint any delays. Step 2 is a medical assessment, basically just to rule out other medical causes for those delays, like hearing loss. And finally, step 3 is the diagnostic assessment. This involves direct interviews and just observing your child playing and interacting naturally. But hey, here is an absolutely crucial takeaway that I really want you to hear. Waitlists for these diagnostic specialists, they can be incredibly long, sometimes stretching out for months. Listen to me, you do not need to wait for a formal piece of paper to start helping your child. You can, and absolutely should, start looking into early intervention support and local therapies right now based purely on the developmental delays you're already seeing. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Exploring Therapies and Support. Navigating autism definitely requires a highly personalized toolkit. Applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is a really common therapy that focuses on building independence and communication skills, usually through play-based methods for the younger kids. Then there's speech therapy, which isn't just about talking, it's about developing all forms of communication. And sensory integration therapy, that is an absolute game changer for kids who get overwhelmed by lights, loud sounds, or textures. It helps them process motion and touch so they can just navigate the world a whole lot more comfortably. Now, if your child is working with a speech-language pathologist, they might bring up augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. This could be something as simple as a picture board or as high-tech as a tablet. And I want to bust a huge myth right here. There's a rumor out there that giving a child a communication device will make them lazy and stop them from ever learning to speak. No way. The research shows the exact opposite. AAC gives your child a voice, massively reduces their frustration, and actually facilitates and encourages natural speech development. And remember, therapy doesn't just happen in a clinic for an hour a week, right? It happens right there in your living room. The small, consistent supports you build at home are so incredibly powerful. Establishing predictable daily routines really reduces the cognitive load on your child. Creating a sensory-friendly calm-down corner gives them a safe space to decompress when things get to be too much. Using a visual schedule, like a little board showing first breakfast, then school, is incredibly effective for managing that anxiety around transitions. And always try to use clear, direct language. Skip the vague idioms or sarcasm for now. To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with kind of a provocative thought. It is completely natural to fear labels, right? But what if a diagnosis isn't a label that limits your child? What if, instead, it's the exact key required to unlock their unique world? A diagnosis provides this brilliant roadmap to better understand your child, get the right support, and connect with them entirely on their own terms. It's never about fixing them. It's about building a world that fits them perfectly. Thank you so much for taking this journey of discovery with me today, and keep advocating for those incredible kids of yours.